Political power often creates a dangerous illusion. When leaders insulate themselves from public questioning, they mistake temporary authority for absolute invulnerability. Ruling alliances sometimes boast their ministers simply do not resign. They aggressively posture as unified fronts, treating demands for accountability as attacks to be defeated. This deliberate refusal cuts the direct line between an action and its consequence. The government begins to operate as if an election victory granted them an inherited estate, rather than a conditional, temporary lease on power. When the position of leadership is elevated so high that public questions can no longer reach it, the daily mechanics of democracy stall. The system loses its ability to enforce immediate responsibility. A resignation acts as a critical pressure valve, allowing a government to release public scrutiny and absorb failures. But if a ruling party intentionally jams that valve shut, unresolved energy loops back, putting immense stress on surrounding institutions. So if the leadership calculates that stepping down shows weakness, and they refuse to yield even when public trust is visibly fractured, how exactly does a democracy correct itself? Ignoring daily demands for transparency does not erase the questions. It accumulates them, ensuring that the inevitable release of pressure will be massive. Stepping down from a post is actually the required first step of taking structural responsibility. It acknowledges a failure and clears the way for repair. Instead of this, governments often rely on shuffling the deck. They swap cabinet ministers or rebrand their outward optics to simulate decisive action and appease critics. Changing the face occupying the position does absolutely nothing to repair the underlying breach of trust. It prioritizes the survival of the governing body over the need to actually solve the problem. The electorate observes this calculus in real time. They watch a government spend its political capital protecting its own members rather than fulfilling its obligations to the citizens. Citizens process these cosmetic swaps for what they are, an admission that something went wrong, completely decoupled from any real consequences for the people who did it. Every unanswered scandal and refused resignation is recorded in a silent collective ledger kept by voters. When the parliament refuses to hold its own members accountable, the venue for that trial physically moves out of the capital. It relocates to dusty fields and community centers across the country. The final judges in this process are the everyday citizens standing in these lines. They arrive holding the accumulated receipts of a government's arrogance. By refusing to be questioned during their term, the leadership turns a standard election cycle into a strict nationwide audit of their character. There is a distinct tipping point where accumulated distrust crystallizes. The election ceases to be a debate over policy and becomes a binding, inescapable verdict on the government's behavior. This scoreboard shows the hard quantitative data of an election result, displaying a 343-seat mandate on one side of the screen. It proves that public sentiment eventually translates into undeniable math. When leaders refuse to sacrifice individual ministers to appease the public, the electorate eventually uses their numerical power to sweep entire governments out of power simultaneously. All the carefully constructed political rhetoric and defensive posturing instantly collapse against these raw vote tallies. The citizens below the screen represent the physical transfer of authority back to its origin. No amount of narrative control, cabinet shuffling, or stubborn defiance can outlast the cold mathematics of a nationwide mandate. Take away the mandate, and the imposing, untouchable throne dissolves. Without the explicit backing of the voters, the highest seat is exposed for what it actually is, just a fragile piece of wooden furniture. The authority wielded by any politician is conditional and temporary. The foundational power to grant or revoke that authority resides with the people standing in line. In a functioning democracy, the final binding signature on any law or political career is never made by a minister's pen. It is made by the collective decision of the public.